Morning, everyone. Completely filled up. 5 minutes back, we were still waiting for everyone to come in. A great audience to have here. Thanks, Sriram, and thanks, Anand, for organizing this event and giving me the chance to speak on this topic. It's a particularly interesting and highly relevant topic. We are reading it every day in the news. Lone wolf terrorists are on the rise. Insider threat is growing. There's an emerging internal threat. The topic I was given was, and we had not structured it, we were in discussions on what we should keep it, and it was identifying and preventing the insider threat. But I slightly tweaked it, and I said you can only prevent this threat if you understand it properly and identify it properly. So I just tweaked the wordings in the introduction, and that's highly relevant because this is one threat that you're not going to be able to solve if you don't understand it. Just to break down the threat right in the beginning itself. The trend is on the rise. Almost all experts' analysis that we're reading everywhere is saying that trends in lone wolf, or what they call as wolf pack incidents or attacks, are on the rise. Basically, a wolf pack would mean that they are not directly associated with any particular organization. They have a very loose affiliation, or maybe don't have an affiliation at all. Now, why is this happening? Is this tactic? Why is it developing suddenly? Is it sudden, one, and is it happening for a conscious reason? We know technology is now an ubiquitous part of a terrorist activity cycle, right from planning to execution. Is this a critical element of this threat? And people. There's a lot of media reports that you get and you read them, and they say Wahhabism or Salafism is, causing people to move towards a particular direction. I think that's a highly misleading point. And as the cases of 2015 and 2016 demonstrate, in most cases, a pious religious man was not behind it, or religious theology had little to do with their motivations to go ahead with the attack. So therefore, it means that who are these people who can become part of this kind of an insider threat, and can they be part of our organizations? And then to summarize the threat very simply, for us as practitioners in our organizations, the threat falls down to, can an employee susceptible to this kind of radicalization carry out and execute an attack? He could do it because he's got grievances with his co-workers or grievances against his management, or he could have his own personal issues and he has an avenue to take it out in form of a violent expression. I think if I summarize, this is the internal threat. This is what we're going to be talking about in the next 30 minutes. And my idea is that in the next 30 minutes, I provide you with a narrative where I put 3-4 things into context. One is the rise in lone wolf terrorist attacks. Why is it happening? The role technology is playing. And also radicalization, understanding it more than just simply saying, okay, social network and it's happening on WhatsApp, it's happening on Facebook. How does it really make a person radical? What is it doing? Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, gentlemen. Can you just click it for me, maybe? Yeah. Thanks. Before I get into the insight, or rather, this is the most relevant slide, I think, when somebody talks on terrorism. This is a master slide on terrorism. Modern terrorism, the ones that we've seen from the 1880s, the Russians when they started as anarchist movements. And this slide is very important because it puts into context of where a tactic like a lone wolf attack comes in, or where does this religious fervor come in. It didn't happen. We are the 90s generation, so we see it from that perspective. But going backwards, you get a far more deeper understanding of and a structure in which you can study terrorism and place into brackets the various tactics that emerge and how terrorist organizations have evolved over the years. And it can be done very, very structurally. If you take it into 4 waves, you see the first wave is from 1880s to 1920s. just to mention that each cycle is roughly around 40 to 45 years. And what I mean by a wave or a cycle is there's this particular type or a branding to the kind of terrorist wave that you have at that point. So in the 1880s, train transportation had just started, becoming global. Press had become a big medium, and Russians were writing a lot of anarchist literature, which spread to Europe, then to Americas, and then to Asia. And then you have these wave of anarchist attacks. The defining point being the tactic in this case. It was assassinations, hitting banks because they wanted money, very targeted attacks, very, very limited amount of casualties. And there was a purposeful attempt to keep the number of casualties less, but cause disturbance. And then you move to the 1920s and 1960s. What's happening here? You have a lot of self-determination cases happening across the globe. And through that, it spurs a lot of terrorist organizations that were fighting for their freedom, or perceptively fighting for their freedom of their countries. Again, it lasted for 40, 45 years. You have groups like, very famous ones like IRA, the Irish Republican Army, and the ETAs in Spain. And here the tactics changed again, and it became more guerrilla-like attacking. Assassinations were less. Banks were not attacked. Suddenly, they were not a target because finances were coming from people, from the public. And guerrilla hit-and-run tactics, hitting military outposts, police, and government establishments. And then you move to the third wave, which is the 1960s to 1980s, which albeit lasted a little less than the other waves, maybe 30, 35 years. It was the left wave which came after the Vietnam War. The Soviets suddenly spurred a bunch of revolutionary movements across the world, Latin America being particularly on the forefront. But you also have ones in Japan. You also have the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, which ostensibly again had the same, in this wave, basically all the organizations that were operating, maybe 90% of them would have the same ideology. Different regions, different geographies, but ostensibly in this left movement, or socialist movement. They wanted a secular state in most cases. Here the tactic was, it changed to just being localized. They started hitting out at international places. They started hitting at embassies. They started hitting at foreign institutions. And here's where global attacks start their trend. And then you have the fourth wave, which is 1979, and starts in 1979, 80s, after the Islamic revolution in Iran, and then you also, and it's spurred from that. You also have, a whole change in the tenor of the kind of motivations these organizations had. It moved from the secular, state-oriented kind of to a religious-oriented motivation. You saw it in the LTT, you saw it in the Al-Qaeda, and now we're seeing it in the ISS as well. And if we go by the pattern, 40, 45 years, 40, 45 years, 30, 35 years, and if this started in the 80s, then we can expect that this would last another maybe 10 to 15 years more at minimum. In this, the tactics changed drastically. Three things actually happened. One, the tactics changed drastically. It became all about causing mass casualty. You have Aum Shinrikyo, which is a Japanese religious group, which carried out its first, sort of a WMD attack, you could say, using sarin gas in a train station. That's the actual use of a WMD. You have suicide bombings becoming very prominent in this wave. And again, it needs to be understood why we call it the religious wave. Religion was important in all these waves. It was an integral element. But over here, this becomes the principle of forming the organization, the terrorist organization. It becomes the principal justification as well. And that's why we're calling it the religious wave. Now, in this context, lone wolf attacks as a tactic starts emerging around the 1990s. It actually starts in America. They came out with a book called the Turner Diaries, and this diaries outlines the whole plan of how a man has to fight against the American state at that point, and the FBI is the enemy, and he has to carry out a lone wolf attack. And basically the book is a guide to a person who wants to understand how to circumvent the Secret Service or the surveillance state at that period, the 90s. And of course, a live example of that was Timothy McVeigh, who then bombed in Oklahoma. He bombed the FBI, he took car, and bombed. But most interesting about that case is how gradual radicalization through these pieces of literature took place over a period of time, and he had his own issues. And it all combined together and made him a lone wolf terrorist. But the ISIS today, when we talk and we read, and there's a genuine reason to be apprehensive of them. They have, unlike any other group, been able to attract nationalities from several countries, nationals from several countries, unprecedented. I mean, 30,000 fighters. Al-Qaeda tried it, a lot of them have tried it, but they've been by far the most successful. And therefore, they make a good case in point to study and see how they have gone about, how they're approaching this whole element as a tactic and taking forward for us then to be able to see what we must do to prevent or to at least take some preventive measures against it. Can you just click? Thanks. There are four factors essentially that are driving the ISIS threat or the lone wolf threat. One is the movement of foreign fighters. As I mentioned, it was able to attract a large pool of foreign fighters. And now these guys, with the attacks happening in Mosul and Syria and Libya, they're going back to their countries of origin. This to and fro movement means that it has the availability of these people to create small cells, operate almost independently, no need to have a direct link with the organization, and going back to the principle of a lone wolf attack. Is it a conscious strategy? Yes. It is a conscious strategy of the ISIS. Since 2014, we've been hearing various speeches, manifestos coming out, playbooks, editorials, which outline the entire strategy of how they must go to for the clickers, thanks. Outline their strategy for carrying out lone wolf attacks. And then the third factor is, of course, the combination of technology and how they're not the first group to use technology. We knew Mumbai attackers had used technology as well. They use Google, they use GPS. But why are they different, and why is it so significant here? It's because they're being able to utilize it in a very effective manner, unlike any other group, to be able to draw recruits. And even without drawing in recruits, getting people to execute attacks in their name. And that is unprecedented. And the fourth is, of course, the demography itself. You have a much younger terrorist these days. If you go back to the waves, the earlier average age group must have been 30 to 35. Today we're looking at as young as 14. So this demography is also going to play an important role in how this threat is going to manifest. Excuse me. The first factor, as I mentioned, Iraq, Syria, Libya. This is where the ISIS had its central pool of commanders. Its finances were coming from there. It had oil and gas, which was illegal selling. It had extortion rackets running there. It made a lot of money. It had all its commanders pooled in there. And it also had the tactical experience of being in this region for a long period of time. Now, with the Americans and the Russians and the foreign forces now invading Mosul and dispersing them, many of their key commanders have been killed, many on the run. Their finances have been cut off. But their operational structure is likely to prevail. It's not going to deplete because they have successfully transitioned their tactic. They have successfully said, we don't need to operate as a strong central group. We can operate as a decentralized group, and we're okay with people giving their allegiance even if they don't belong to us. We don't need to do their planning for them. Is this contributing to a global trend in rise in lone wolf terrorist attacks? Yes. If you just take this is for 2016, I'm referring to 2015, 2016. Europe had sent, is particularly vulnerable. Belgium has sent the largest number of fighters, I think around maybe 1,500. France 500, UK 850, 2,000. And all these people are now, those who have not been killed in action, are returning back to their country of origin. Or they're on the run in various parts of the world. But it can be expected that they'll go back to Europe. And we've already seen the implications of that. We've seen attacks in Belgium and a continuous high alert in Europe for the last 6 months. They've been on severe for the last 6 months. Britain is on a high threat alert. And they're not being able to come down because they just don't know how and when this attack is going to take place. Is it going to be a knife attack? Is it going to be a niche kind of truck attack? And this is putting them in a very difficult position in Europe. They don't have answers to it. And added to that, the number of immigrants that are coming into the country is creating its own political paradoxes. So Europe is in this situation. America is faring no better. They have around 500 people who come back. And they have faced an Orlando attack, which is a person who didn't even go to the IS, didn't travel to Iraq. He's pledging his allegiance. A year back, before that, a couple killed 14 people in a, not as famous as the Orlando attack, where 40 odd people got killed. But before that, this couple pledged allegiance very similar to the way the Orlando attacker did, pledged his allegiance to the ISIS, killed 14 people in a shopping mall. And no links again. But now with these people coming back, they can become handlers, they can become recruiters, they can push people into a certain mental state to carry out these attacks, the invisible hands. Similarly, in Middle East, Saudi Arabia, of course, is one, Jordan is another, Turkey, all three areas where you're going to face, where ISIS is literally at their borders. These guys are going to come in there and carry out attacks, develop cells, and encourage the same idea that has been perpetuated for the last 6 to 7 years. Build a cult for lone wolf attacks. Indonesia, last 2 years, their counterterrorism agency has been reporting that lone wolf terrorist attacks are on the rise. The most recent being the pipe bombing in Jakarta. Australia has fared no better. In 2015, there was an attempt to kill a shooting incident, a plot to carry out a shooting style incident on Veterans Day. And the 14-year-old boy that I mentioned earlier was based in UK, and this is the case that he was involved in. He was sitting in the UK in his bedroom, and he was organizing this entire plan. More recently, in 2016, they've again captured someone who was attempting a pipe bomb. Bangladesh, I think we've all been following the news. We, of course, had our the very scary incident in Holy Artisan Bakery, where these 4, 5 boys got radicalized very quickly, never traveled, got radicalized, carried on an attack in the name of the ISIS. But it is important to mention that even though they operate somewhat in a diffused manner, there are handlers. It is still a classical terrorist move. There are handlers, though they don't play an aggressive role in continuity of the whole operations. At some point, they can just let go and let them carry out the attack. If it goes well, great. If they kill 2 people, it's still great. If they kill 10 people, it's still great. I was mentioning al-Baghdadi, who's probably a nom de guerre for the ISIS leader at this point. He outlined this strategy very clearly, lone wolf strategy, in 2014. Then there was a spate of speeches and editorials like the Grey Zone, which came in their magazines, and I'll allude to them in the next few slides, which then again talk about how a person must operate in an environment where the police is there, and how to circumvent the police, how to ensure that you are not being surveilled, how to identify a target, how to build bombs from materials from common materials that are easily found. And then you have the spokesperson of ISIS who gives a call, very clear call in 2016. And then there's a sharp rise. There's a sharp rise in the number of incidents. The very distinct thing about this, about how ISIS has transitioned this tactic, which I don't think is new. I think the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula was the first one to originate this idea. It realized that when you operate in a particular zone and you're vulnerable to drone attacks and you're vulnerable to security forces invading your country and taking away your territory, clamping down on your finances, there is a need to develop and evolve a new tactic. And they came up with one in around 2006 and then again in 2009. But ISIS took it to the fore. They've taken it and they mastered it. And what is really unique in this one is that they don't no longer, need the sophistication and planning of a 9/11 attack. They don't want it. They're not asking for it. In the calls that Adani made, he said, kill 2 people, kill 1 person, kill any infidel. I'm okay with it. There's no tactic. There's no planning required. There's no. All you need to do is give your allegiance. Just go say I'm doing it in the name of ISIS. But how does one get people to do that? And that's what ISIS really mastered. They've mastered the recruitment strategy. Unlike Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula or any other group before that, they have mastered the recruitment framework. And they've done this through technology. And they've done this through the online radicalization that we're talking about and that we're reading about. I was mentioning a classical terrorist activity cycle or a chain is, recruitment, logistics, operation planning, attack execution, and post-attack. This is just a cursory slide. Just want to refresh the cycle and in our heads and see how. And what I'm outlining here is some of the things that they're utilizing in these various stages. You have virtual gaming. Literally, virtual gaming sites are being used to recruit people. There was a very famous called Juba the Sniper. In Iraqi Al-Qaeda team had made that game, and it was very, very popular. And I think now it's closed down, but it used to attract a lot of people at one point. Social networks. And it's not just simply using Facebook and, of course that is there. They're using Twitter, Facebook, but they're also getting in the hacks if they're required to deep dive and check and surveil people on. And they need to do their checking as well. Otherwise, they're aware, they're conscious that, the US or India or UK would be planting its agents on Facebook to get recruited. So they have their own methodologies to double check. They have data warehouses now. Many of them being closed down as we go, but they continuously keep springing up. Data warehouses basically have a large pool of recruits through which they keep scanning who's the best. But IS has gone really deep. They do it in 2 ways. They do it both in terms of online, and then they also interact with the person whenever they get an opportunity, build that person, ensure that this person is going to carry out that attack, and they're preying on a certain vulnerable type. They're using low-cost, secure encryptions to talk. This has been ubiquitous in almost all cases in India, even globally. They use sites which allow them their portals to remain hidden. So it's difficult to carry out a DOS attack on them or denial of service attack on them or to put them down. It's very, very difficult. So they keep springing up. And they have a dedicated team to do this. And in this case, we've not seen any hybrid attack where you have both a conventional and a cyber attack. But they have a whole cyber hacking team. The cyber hacking team is quite advanced as well. They keep throwing out feeds on how to beat cameras or to hack cameras, web security cameras, or to defeat certain surveillance systems. And of course, in the post-attack, and this is important. If you remember the Orlando case, when Mateen carried out the attack, he pledged his allegiance, he took a photo. And then all the ISIS supporters immediately put his photo on their Twitter page. This creates a whole ambience of the attack. Although it was one man carrying out this attack, no terrorist planning, no operational link with the ISIS. Yet, just by the ISIS doing this one thing of taking 25,000 Twitter accounts, putting his photograph and posting it out there, creates a world. It's attractive to many others who would like to join. So the whole stage, every stage is planned with the idea of getting more and more people involved into this activity. Recruitment has been key. Just a summary of their online propaganda machinery. They have 2 media houses. Sophisticated, polished videos. 200 pro ISIS websites. Again, these are based on the latest figures. It keeps going up and down as studies go. They keep changing. You pull down 100, they create 100 more. 25,000 global Twitter accounts is a conservative figure. According to a Brookings study, it's 90,000. I'm going with an anonymous hacking figure. In 2016, this was the figure they gave. I'm going with that. They have a magazine called The Beak. Now, this magazine is very interesting. They started with Arabic, then they went into English, then Russian, Tamil, Urdu, Arabic. Tamil, Hindi, Arabic, all languages. Russian, basically catering to a wide global audience. And this is partly the reason why they were very successful in getting a very large audience from different nationalities. Al-Qaeda also had a magazine, AQAP in the Arabian Peninsula also had a magazine. It was an English magazine, but it never had this kind of success. And these magazines are polished magazines. As I was mentioning the cyber hackers, in fact, in 2016, they posted a YouTube video showing how they can hack, how a perpetrator can hack access cameras, access communication cameras. Of course, measures were immediately taken, and they were able to, Access was able to remedy the situation, and these YouTube videos were also pulled out. But the fact that they're involved in this and that they can produce this kind of material and keep giving this kind of suggestions, very interesting. They have, of course, YouTube and Facebook, which they use for identifying people in different geographies, engaging with them in conversations over a period. This is the texture of it. What they really do is, and distinct to any other group, is they spend thousands of man hours on a single person. They listen to his personal grievances through these forums. They catch these people through these places, start talking to them, discuss their political points, discuss their personal grievances, their life, their general day-to-day things, and take them in a particular direction towards a narrative that they want them to go towards. It's a proper brainwashing 101. But the amount of effort they spend and the amount of machinery that they put into it has been more significant than any other group so far. These are some of the social media sites that you can find on, you can just search them on Google and you can easily find them. Some little bit of pointers on what they do. Al Hayat produces very interesting movies. This is the magazine that I was mentioning. Can you just click, I think. Thanks. Think a little. Just after this, thanks. Thanks. Yeah, so once you have, okay, so here's the framework. You have the websites, you have the Facebooks, you have the WhatsApps, you have the encryption tools, you have the recruitment idea, you have the framework ready, you've trained your people, centralized them and said, okay, look, this is how you have to attract people, this is how you have to recruit. Then how does it work on an individual basis? How does a person sitting in US get radicalized? How does a person sitting in India get radicalized? What is this? I think it's a simple three-step sort of understanding in this. The first, build the narrative. This is, as I mentioned, the Turner Diaries, they had created narrative. Similarly, you have, AQAP had created a manifesto saying the world is divided after the 9/11 attacks. It used words of George W. Bush itself and directly used the words of Diary and said that it's either us or them. And they would play on these captions, these ideas, and create a narrative of an alternate world view, saying, look, it's a battle, it's them or us. In fact, this is this is the first step of any radicalization program. The Norwegian who carried out the attack on a leftist school, which killed, I think, 77 people, he had written a 15,000-page manifesto on the new war on civilization. He's a right-winger. He's from the far right, white supremacist, and by doing that he was able to create a narrative through which an ordinary person is able to justify his move towards a violent expression. So the first part is create the alternate worldview, create a reality, and create something where people come and now engage. In the next stage, customize it. As I mentioned, they spent 1,000 hours on a single person. In ISIS, when it realized that there's more recruitment happening in the south of this country, as evidenced in the recent cases, they created a video in Tamil. That shows that they are ready to customize it to attract more people. Similarly, in China, they pick up issues like the Uyghurs. They'll say, look, this is happening bad. And then they also follow it up with a song in Chinese. That's the level of customization they're getting into. But the third step, and this is the most important step, comes down to the individual. And if we take these 7-8 cases, that the big prominent cases since I think 2009 to now, it evidences that different people get motivated differently. As simple as that. But there are some common patterns which we'll come to in the next slide. But let's take a few examples. Nidal Hassan, the Ford Hood shooting. He started getting anxious about the idea of US war on Iraq and Afghanistan. He gets into a conversation with Anwar Alaki, who was the AQAP head at that time. And they start having a correspondence where they don't talk about religion. They don't talk about any theological portion. And they correspond only on how unjust this war is. They don't even discuss at any point what kind of terrorist attack should be done, or that there should be a terrorist attack that should be done. Nothing. There is no discussion of any kind of an activity involving terrorism. It is just a correspondence on how unjust this war is. It pushes him to carry out this attack. Zehav Bebu, the Parliament shooting in Canada, known mental illnesses, addiction to drugs, alcohol, basically a person who was directionless in life. The Paris attackers, Salah Abdeslam was a Belgian who lost his brother in Syria. He himself was not motivated by any jihadi ideas. But one of his friends, who happened to be an ISIS member, for 6 months continuously brainwashes him, takes him to his brother's grave, spends time with him there, says, the French are responsible. And revenge becomes his motivation. Again, no point do they discuss any kind of religious theology or ISIS also in this case. It just becomes revenge. That the French are responsible, must carry out. And then he, of course, joins the attackers who were part of the Bataclan shootings. The rest of them were also all criminals. They were part of gangs. They were involved in drugs. Maisa there was a plot to Mayasa was they were trying to recruit this lady, and again she met these women recruiters, not in mosques, not in religious places. They met in cheeseburger joints, and it was a gradual transformation, and they would gradually brainwash her. And she basically came from a dysfunctional family. Her father and mother were getting a divorce, and they played on that, captioned her, and transformed her to become suddenly from this person who wears jeans and t-shirts and smokes suddenly to become a burqa wearing idea to go and join ISIS, this desperate need to join the ISIS. Similarly with Omar Mateen, very confused individual, most likely had a serious identity issue, marginalized. The Nice attacker had dating apps for both men and women, narcotics, drinks. Germany axe attacker came from Afghanistan, 17-year-old guy, was a refugee staying at the foster home. Again, no parents, no structure, 17-year-old boy. And this tells me a certain pattern. They all, if we just take those cases, and I'll come to India in a bit, they were broadly jihadists. They broadly fell for the narrative, but they lacked committed ideologies. Omar Mateen, when he was initially getting into the process of, before he conducted his Orlando attacks, actually claimed he was Hezbollah, which is a Shia organization. So there's no even fixed ideology. They just want to be part of the general jihadi narrative. Maybe that gives them some sense of identity. In most cases, they were confused losers, criminals, into drugs. And I think it's a tangle of personal and political grievances that come together, and then that search for an identity. Either you're the infamous terrorist, the reformed sinner, uh, the gangster. So some kind of identity, a search for an identity, and that is relevant because we're talking about young demography of these terrorists. So this makes sense. It may not make sense to us, but it makes sense when you're that young and looking for rebellious ideas, and you've been thrown in a world of heavy Islamophobia and a war on terror generation. You can see from the demography. 19, 20, 21, 17, 27, 17. The Al-Qaeda, the average age in 2012, when this study was done of 400 Al-Qaeda, Wahhabi, Salafi terrorists, the average age was 27, excuse me. As we go on through the years, the average age is definitely, one, it has already come down, but I think it is getting even younger. You have minors now in this case. You have a 40-year-old, you have 17s. This is an alarming trend. This is the population which is tech savvy. They're young, they're attracted to, they're online all the time, they're living in virtual worlds, they're aware of these virtual gaming sites that I don't even go to. They have access to this, and they are accessing it. And what's going to feed into the head, or what's going to play in the head, we don't know. You see the Indian cases over there. 2 software engineers, 2 engineering dropouts, a graphic designer, accountant, businessman. The threat to India from ISIS is almost as old as the threat of lone wolf terrorist attacks that ISIS propounded. It's almost corresponding. In fact, in its very first Khilafah magazine, which is a big poster right in the middle, which came out here, they very clearly talk about Indians in their ranks. We know of 94 websites. We know of 130 who are under the scanner. We know 40, 50 joined. Now, joining ISIS, I can still validate these figures. There is some research, there's some foundation to these figures. But to say that 130 are radicalized, this is based on ATS data, Maharashtra ATS data, and some NIA data as well. I would say it's a highly conservative figure. I would not back this figure, but this is the most credible figure that we have at this point. We know that there are people who are on Twitter as well, and Biswas was among the top 10 Twitter accounts for ISIS globally. Some of the states that they've been is Delhi, Maharashtra, 12 states, so Delhi, Maharashtra, Jharkhand, Haryana, Kerala, Jharkhand, Jaipur. Let's look at the 3 big plots that we have seen in the last, this year. It's quite revealing in some senses, but importantly, it matches the trends that we were talking about globally. The Hyderabad cell. You had 5 people who were arrested in this, some 6, 7 were apprehended initially. Their targets was a mall and an IT park. They came very close to executing this attack. They managed to get the explosives. Unlike any other plot so far, they were in a very advanced stage. Importantly, all students. They had handlers. They had a handler who was sitting abroad, but very limited interference. They managed to get the explosives from within the country itself. They managed to they used encryption softwares to circumvent any kind of surveillance. They kept changing their names on Facebook and WhatsApp. So basically, they're a tech-savvy young bunch who can play around with existing technologies and circumvent the usual methods by which you interdict them. Secondly, there was no precursor to be able to identify these are the guys who are going to suddenly carry out this attack. They had no associations with any other terrorist group. They had, in this case, they did not even have criminal links. The West Bengal plot, smaller in scale, but interesting nonetheless because it was one person. He had two handlers. And that shows you again how ISIS identifies a single person but spends and invests its time in that person. It goes after that person to make sure he does something. Man recce'd J&K, he recce'd West Bengal, he bought a 13-inch machete, and his plan was use that machete, kill foreigners. That was the agenda given to him, and he was not identified with the handlers. He became radicalized online, went to the right forums, and they captured him. The South India cell, which is the most recent one, again they came from different parts of South India, Kerala, Tamil Nadu. One had fought in ISIS and come back. He was in charge of getting the explosives, and before he could materialize that plan, the whole cell was busted. He was in touch with handlers in Qatar. The rest of them, however, were radicalized just through the pure network. None of them had gone to ISIS. And they're from different parts of the country. And again, engineers, we're talking about engineers, engineer dropouts, BComs. Again, they were communicating very sophisticatedly. WhatsApp, changing their names continuously, changing the group names continuously. And they were also using what is called a Telegram channel, which is quite popular among terrorist groups because it gives you anonymity and it's encrypted. And the plan was to hit Israelis and other tourists, but to do it in a nice truck attack, the way the truck attack happened in Nice, in a similar manner. Barge in and kill something. But they were apprehended before that could take place. The radicalization of these people, again, it fits the pattern. In the Kerala case, the individuals who were radicalized were the graphic designer in particular, who was part of an organization called PFI. He was fired from PFI. PFI is considered a slightly right-wing organization, non-violent right-wing organization. Few incidents of extreme violence have taken place, not terrorist related, but they're in that direction. And they found his views too extreme, and they fired him. They said, "You're close to we don't endorse the ISIS. Please leave." This is months before he became part of this cell. It says something. It says that, again, this gentleman is not. I mean, you're right there. You're touching PFI is got a strong Wahhabi flavor. Whereas you're getting a theology that should supposedly, as what is generally made out, should attract them. It didn't. His views came from somewhere else. His views are coming from this online environment, which is IS online environment, which is feeding him ideas which are different to any. It's got little, like I said right in the beginning, little or nothing to do with Wahhabism. What does this mean in terms of challenge? Now, this is the threat. These are the four factors. You have young demography, you have lone wolf terrorism on the rise, you have technology in play. What does this mean for us as professionals? What are the challenges now we face because of this threat? Well, one, he's a young and tech-savvy terrorist. We know the trend is going to increase for a while. We know there's no way we're going to kill all the Twitter accounts overnight. There's no way we're going to stop all these web portals overnight. And we're also not going to change the world dynamic that's happening in the world and the general conversation and the wars that are taking place around the globe. So if that's there. Most importantly, in a technology-driven age, the process of radicalization has become very fast. So it could be a mood shift. You could have an employee who's just going through a particular phase, and he would be normal at one point with no indications of going towards any kind of violent extremism, but overnight shift. That creates a very difficult task here to then detect this person, and then how do we, if you can't detect, you can't prevent. We also know that the attack can happen anyway. So you can create a number of safeguards, you can create boom barriers, you can create cameras in the right places. But here's a guy takes a knife, starts attacking people. How and when Do you know that's going to happen? We also know that the profile of these people vary. There is no profile. If you go by the profile, you're going to make a big mistake. We may think you're doing the right thing by profiling someone. Yes, profiling is important. But what type of profiling? So I'll end with this slide and then we can leave some time for some discussions maybe. These are the broad preventive measures that people are talking about. But at this stage, these are not well formulated ideas. For example, social media profiling. It's in the stage of debate. We need to profile people, sure. How do you balance it with privacy? Now, I know Wipro has what we call an enterprise social network, which is our in-house social network. I'm presuming other organizations also. It's a common feature these days. And typically, if you look at the past cases, you've seen that people have vented or given some kind of odd behavior before they carry out this sudden act. And if we are able to spot that odd behavior or comments or literature that somebody is putting onto a social network or a certain viewpoint that they're putting across on a social network, and if you're able to capture that in time, then at least you'll be able to create some level of initial profiling, which is more accurate. Definitely must maintain a blacklist. I think all organizations need to maintain a blacklist. I'm sure many of you do as well, of people who have given some level of disturbance or shown tendencies of violence or have mental health issues or suicidal attempts. I think that list is important because if we see it, personal grievances and mental illness have been a common factor. And if that is a common factor, then we need to have a blacklist of that. What is important is to take it further and maybe have some inter-organizational discussions on these lists. Definitely deeper and more advanced screening. We typically in an organization, when you recruit people, you do an initial background screening, which can vary from low to heavy. But at some point if you are undertaking tasks of profiling a particular lot of people based on some sophistication, you need to then maybe do a secondary level of screening again and again of select individuals. Definitely you need to enhance your traditional security measures. You need to have a quick response team. You need to have emergency response providers, which is the medical and other people, also very quickly available, because in most cases you will not be able to prevent an attack, and in that case then at least your responses of taking care of the injured or somebody's on a knife attack and all, if you have your emergency response very quick, you may be able to save a lot of lives. Trainings definitely on behavioral training for security personnel. Now there are such trainings out there. I cannot vouch for the efficacy, but they are there. It spots odd behavior again. For example, if an employee or a person coming to your campus is taking too much of an interest in what your security procedures are, chatting you up or speaking to your guards and finding out, I think that should get reported back. That's an odd behavior. Maybe the person is just asking out of curiosity, maybe not. But these are the kind of behavioral patterns that our guards need to sort of move to that level. It won't happen overnight, but I think there's some need to start investing into those kind of trainings at all levels of the security teams. Unlike any other threat before, this threat provides a unique opportunity to sort of sync up with your IT and your HR, because you're talking about ranging from activity from profiling to deep screening to linkage, having good liaison with the security services of your state or your national agencies, where the physical security part comes in. Also, the physical security will play a role in the traditional act of stopping or neutralizing a particular attack. And then you have the element where you require the IT base to monitor the various social networks that you have within your organization, communications within your organizations, as far as you can go within the parameters of not invading the privacy or breaching privacy issues. Again, for IT to do that, they would need to know more. They would need to know what are the parameters on which you're going to profile these people. What are the keywords you're looking for? And I think, again, here's where as physical security professionals or professionals in the security domain, we can give our advice and say these are the parameters on it, be it age, be it words, keywords, be it searches, and it may not necessarily materialize into a concrete profiled terrorist, but at least you'll start taking the right preventive measures, because this threat is not going anywhere for the next 10, 15 years. I think that's about it, gentlemen. I'll leave it open to discussion and questions, so answer as how you want me to take it.
If anyone has questions, please raise your hand and we'll get the microphones to you.
Obviously a fantastic eye-opener for, I think, a lot of people in the room. But something that I come across very often, and I thought maybe not just to the benefit of self, but to the audience as well, is a lot of organizations have their, we all have, for that matter, our own risk appetite. But at the same time, when you try an enhanced security outlook or an infrastructural change or any kind of an enhancement that we're talking about, organizations tend to wipe it away by saying, you know, we have a very open door policy and we can't restrict our employees to a certain level or beyond a certain stage of the security. So if you can highlight something on that aspect, that, you know, how should organizations proactively take up a measure in that sense, where, you know, without really crossing the line onto privacy, but you're also enhancing the security for the employees or your assets, people assets, typically.
I think it plays down. I think the last point on this that I was talking about, sort of, where it cannot happen just from a security point of view anymore. In this particular threat, and I think with this nature of threat, you need to have the other two stakeholders on board with you. You need to have the HR, and you need to have your, whether it's a CISO or your IT, whoever your IT security head is, to be involved in this process. And all three need to have a joint recognition of this particular threat. Now, by doing that, if you have a joint recognition of the threat that, look, this can happen, and yes, it can happen from an employee, and yes, these are the trends that are happening, I think everybody is reading and everybody understands this threat, then jointly develop a framework in which this threat can be addressed. And one part of that threat would be to have a more accurate method of profiling. A more accurate method of profiling would allow you then to take the liberties of stopping the right individuals from through your security framework, rather than having a generic and saying, look, I'm going to have a, you know, ubiquitous sort of a security infrastructure to stop people. That's always going to be resisted. I mean, even as security professionals, we don't want to do that. We want to be as accurate as possible. Sometimes because we're limited with what we have in terms of the knowledge or in terms of what kind of threat or how the threat is, or our own perceptions of the threat or our risk appetites, as you said, we define our thresholds. But it's sometimes, I think that's a little subjective. I think to make, and that's fine, that has to be, because we're operating in a subjective domain. But to make it a little more objective and more appealing maybe, then you need to define the parameters on which you're going to profile a person, and make sure that the HR and IT are on board with that. These are the, I mean again, the security element of HR and security element of IT. I mean, that would be my short answer.
Yeah, just a short observation rather. You talked about the religious wave. You clubbed LTT also with the religious wave. I mean, though it is, I would say that LTT would be more an ideological wave rather than a religious wave. But another factor that's coming, like we have a proliferation of social media, WhatsApp and whatever else. There's a question of education and rationality, where you find people are spreading messages. It's in the vernacular, it's in a language that a person can understand. And it's being manipulated in some cases, or it's just being spread. I mean, I don't know, a lot of us forwards that we don't really care to authenticate, and that itself can lead to radicalization, in the sense that a person is not that smart, but he's willing to go with what he reads or what he's exposed to, and then that could lead him to I mean, in this case, violence, or if not violence, some way of compromising the company or the organization. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah. I'll take your second question first. I think your observation on the second point is correct, and that is definitely the larger crux of the case that I was making as well. And I think this is something that is being capitalized on. But where I'm trying to make a small distinction is that we all have, there's something or the other that doesn't appeal to us. We all read something that doesn't appeal to us. We don't even. I think I remember when I was at Stephens. Stephens is heavily communist, heavily leftist. But when you don't push towards violence, there's something which stops you from going to that violence. You're able to construct your ideas and your thoughts. Something else triggers them to move, certain individuals to move towards a violent expression beyond what is out there in the social network domain, or even in the newspaper, or in the media, something that is playing in our heads. And I think that comes down to having individual having a sense of insecure sense of identity, or a personal grievances, and or some kind of mental issues. And I'm keeping it vague because I don't want to describe what mental issues are. But the first two, yes, sense of identity and personal grievances. And I think these are the initial points that create some kind of odd behavior, which can get noticed maybe initially. And this is if this is the you can't capture him by his profile, but you can capture him by his odd behavior on these particular issues. And I think rather than worrying about who's going to get radicalized or not, because that's an impossible task, at least from where we sit. But spotting odd behavior is not. They will give some elements. In almost all cases, they gave priors. They gave enough priors. Not in all cases, maybe not enough, but at least some very distinct priors. Some of them were arrested before. Some of them were let off. In the Belgian case, he was let off. Even in the Australian case, they were 3 weeks before he was apprehended, he was let off. There will be these signs. PFI, firing this person, was a sign. Of course, I mean, we're not the security professionals there apprehending this person. Maybe it did get noticed by the agencies, and this is all coming out now in the media. So these points did get recognized. So I think odd behavior is what we need to create a framework for and identify. And in terms of LTT, I agree with you, sir. Definitely it was a ideological organization, but in a religious wave, I clubbed all the groups that came out at 80s and this thing. The unique thing about why I included LTT was because they were the originators of suicide bombing, in some senses of the words. Before Al-Qaeda. Modern times. This is all modern terrorism. So before Al-Qaeda did it, LTT did it. So the tactic was also important to the wave, and that's the reason I kept it.
Hello. Thanks for a very deep insight into the organizational infrastructure, their ideology, their main intentions and other things. But when we come down to the brass tacks, as regards the, what we are mainly concerned is the corporate vigilance. At the corporate level, any of these guys getting into the kind of preventive measures which have been suggested out here, it will encroach upon their privacy, and the legal hassles which provide them the incubation is very difficult to defend as far as the HR and other people and other agencies are concerned within the corporate. Would you like to comment on this?
Sure. Thank you. This suggestion which I pushed forward, I had to also rationalize very similarly to how you've just expressed it. But there is a reality. Our social networks are monitored. Monitored both by the social network itself, which is Facebook or WhatsApp. It's also monitored by state agencies. And I broke it down further. I said, maybe you can't do it for Facebook. Maybe you can't do it. Obviously, we can't do it for Facebook. We can't do it for WhatsApp. I'm not even sure whether we can do it for certain telecom or phone conversations. Maybe some organizations do that. But I think there's been a trend in the last 5-6 years where all organizations have their own enterprise social network. And if I'm an aggrieved employee and I'm moving towards this direction and I have odd behaviors, one of the places I may release or say something or display my displeasure would be in this social network as well, to stir a conversation, to say something and push my sense of identity. And that if we can pick up, and that is not a legal issue. We all sign the contract where we say if we are on ESN we can, or if there's no such contract, then it can be developed, because I know many organizations have a contract where you say if you're an employee on your employee social network, all your conversations are being monitored. So
things happen under the garb of, the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression.
yes, sir.
And those are the things which in the Twitter or in the Facebook or in the WhatsApp, all those things happen within the this particular ambit.
Yes, but we are not bound by, we don't necessarily have to take action on a particular Twitter statement that a particular employee has made. Let's say I do a deep dive, I outsource a company to do a background check on a particular individual. He looks at the Facebook, he looks at the Twitter, says, look, this is what he's saying, this is the kind of behavior he has. At that point, HR can take a call, and that's all we can do as professionals. We can only ask them to take a call. But
what I'm trying to get onto is the matter of profiling. When you say profiling, suppose over a period of time, for 6 months or 1 year, you have been tracking something, and this guy is just passing the message received from A to B, B to C, and in a group. And when you come on to summarize this particular thing, it's not his opinion. He's just, as a matter of mechanics, he's just passing it on. Then where does this profiling stand?
Just to understand your questions, you're talking about a particular person who could be possibly a sympathizer, not making direct statements, but passing on statements that could be vitriolic or radical. Am I understanding your point correct? It's still then our call to take whether we feel threatened by him or not. If we feel threatened by him, we don't have to necessarily take action on what he's doing on that. There are ways and means, and that's why I come back to the point that I don't think this threat can be dealt in isolation by the security domain alone. It has to have HR on board. They have to have the same understanding of this threat. Otherwise, it will not work.
So, Binoy, wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Really appreciate this. And I'll just extend the conversation. So, for some of you who may know me, Arpit, I've been with Fidelity for a number of years. I headed corporate security there. I now work in India bound. I head the risk management practice. So I actually operate in a number of companies, and I see very similar to what you were saying of how employee relations and legal components work together. So I've actually, when you were speaking, I wrote down a few institutional mechanisms to help answer some of the questions that have come. And here are the institutional mechanisms that are available to corporate security individuals, working in tandem with legal, employee relations, with the CISO, or the ISO, depending whatever the institution there is. And so I've actually got 6 or 7 of these institutions which I have seen work in degree of success, and again, the success can be measured with what you were able to pick up and so on. For anyone, WPV is a program, very nice program, workplace violence. You can identify individuals with a certain behavior trend, social problems, societal tendencies, and we were actually able to identify some of that at Fidelity when I was heading the corporate security function there. These programs, WPV for instance, across American companies is a very known program. There are companies that actually help you roll out WPV program. Emergency helpline, a number of companies would have emergency helpline. People can actually call up and report problems, and those problems can then be further escalated into the TAT team, or what is called the threat assessment team, a combination of HR, employee relations, head of legal, and head of corporate security, and if required, the ISO or the CISO individual as well. A whistleblower line, managers can actually report in problems. Look, my employee has not been coming to the office for 3-4 days, had a domestic violence issue, an elbow was broken, things of that nature. Every employee will have some issue going on, but not all need to be reported in. But those institutional mechanisms can then become something that groups can get together and identify and say, look, let's have a conversation about this. There may be some issue that is coming up that may have a reflection of a problem that might ultimately result into something. ALM, or active policy management, all companies, he's absolutely right, all companies will sign contracts saying this is what you can and cannot do. You will be monitored for all of your communication that is going out. Emails are absolutely monitorable. Drop in keywords. Those emails will drop down. People can then, or team can then identify. and read if those kind of words, keywords are being written about or being sent around. Obviously, all outbound correspondence will have a filter, and that filter can drop that down. There is a program a number of companies have called high-risk roles. So individuals above a certain category on approval chains, especially, let's say, has a 4 lakh loan or a 4 crore loan, and his capacity not to pay that much is out there. That correspondence, something going through that person, do a profiling search on it, identify a CIBIL, and by the way, CIBIL records are available. You can, with the permission of the person, seek and get the CIBIL record upon recruitment. Review, is he really competent to be sitting in the finance team? He's already got so much of loan. Will he be approving this much? Is he the sole approving authority? And full marks, by the way, to Apollo. I've seen Apollo at being demonstrated through Wipro. It's a wonderful program, actually, where you can identify, whether that principal, the person who was approving it, had 2 levels of approval chain and so on and so forth. Again, small components, they all need to work in tandem. None of them will work or be successful individually. There are ways in which you can monitor SMS. People using BlackBerry or good application through BYOD devices, those go through the office networks, and they can all be monitored. No problem, you've signed a contract to be able to do so. Privacy is not a concern as far as the person working in the company is, because they're using the company networks to do so. And the final one is the enterprise social network. Again, an institutionalized way in which one can monitor and review correspondence that is going around in the company. That will really help and identify deviant behavior, any radicalization, any issues that the person is facing, any non-work that is less than happy conversation. You can pick up, identify, drop it if there is no problem there. But certainly large corporations will need an institutionalized framework, top management approval to be able to do so. Shouldn't be a problem. I think given today's day and age, the kind of companies that there are and the number of people that exist. So I actually wrote down several of these which are all possible, doable, and very large companies actually do so. So back to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think we'll move to the next session. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just quick word. I think we're all looking forward to hear General Muthanna in the next session. And thank you, Shriram. Thank you, Anand. And thank you, Velan, for organizing this and giving me a chance to speak. Thanks.